Okay, so this is chapter 15 in the 9th edition and 16 in the 10th edition. So we're going to talk about epidemiology and how infections spread. Nosocomial infections are, Nosocomial infections are hospital-borne infections or healthcare setting. Sorry, I'm trying to get the styles to be the right size. And it's not working. Come on. All right. Nosocomial infections are healthcare setting or hospital-borne infections. So I typed out a lot of the words, and we've gone over what epidemiology is before. So it's the study of the factors and all the mechanisms involved in the frequency and how disease spreads. Okay, and it doesn't have to be an infectious disease. It could be other health-related problems like vaping, lung injury, or diabetes or cancer. And it deals with humans, animals, or plants. Okay, now etiology is what is the cause of the disease. So what organism or what kind of thing is actually causing the disease. So down here I have a disease triangle. So in order for disease to occur and take place, you have to have these three things in like a perfect storm kind of situation. Okay, so you have to have a host that is susceptible, you have to have a pathogen that's virulent, and you have to have the right environment for it to grow. Okay, so if any of those three things are not working or not favorable for disease, then you won't have disease. Or if you could stop any of those things, right, you're not going to have disease. Okay, now how does infectious disease spread, and what's the vocabulary used to describe it? Okay, so incidence is the number of new cases. Okay, so that's the important part, is the new. So new cases contracted during a period of time. So usually it's describing the spread of the disease. Okay, so how many new people are getting it in a population. Prevalence is the total number of people that are infected. Okay, so what that's telling you is how serious it is and how long it's lasting. So if you look at this graph, okay, we're looking at weeks on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, it's number of cases per 100,000 in the population. So that number of cases per 100,000 is what we always use when we're talking about epidemiology. So instead of having to write out some big number on the x-axis or the y-axis, this is how they describe it. And that's standard. Okay, so on this graph you can see the incidence, so the number of new cases. Okay, and then over here we have prevalence. So prevalence is how long it's lasting. So we don't have any new cases after week 4, but it's somebody, like some of them are still, some people still have it. Okay, so it's lasting a couple weeks. Okay, now two more vocabulary terms are morbidity and mortality. So morbidity is just the number of people or individuals that are affected by it, and it's always in a set period of time, and it's in relation to the total number of people in a population. Okay, so it's just, do they have it? Are they sick? Okay, and then mortality is how many die. So morbidity, mortality, incidence, and prevalence. Okay, now more things. So when we talk about disease in populations, there's some terms that are used to describe it. So, and these depend on geography, like where it's located and how bad it is. So how many people are really sick. So if it's endemic, so something is endemic, it's always present in that geographical area, but it's usually not high enough that it's causing enough harm to cause a concern. Okay, so it's just always in there. So an example of something that was endemic used to be chickenpox. Okay, so it was always at this kind of this number, like 25 cases per 100,000 people, and it fluctuated seasonally. Okay, so you can see how it goes up, it actually goes up in the spring, and there was a set pattern to it, so it was always there, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't really, really, really bad. It was an epidemic. Okay, then what happened after 1991? That's when they introduced the vaccine. So the numbers are going to go down after that. Okay, now if something is epidemic, it means we have a higher than normal disease incidence. So we have more of it. So if chickenpox was, if we had an epidemic, right? This maybe in this year the peak went up, so you had more of it. Okay, pandemic is when something spreads worldwide. So in 1918, that's when we had the Spanish flu. Okay, and that was like probably one of the, well, I don't know if it's the first example of a pandemic, but it was a bad pandemic. And it spread because of World War I, and people were traveling, or soldiers were being shipped and coming back home, and so the flu spread worldwide. In 2009, another pandemic that they were worried about was swine flu, but they kind of got it under control. But pandemic is bad, right? So pandemic would be an epidemic, but it would be worldwide proportions. Or not proportions, portions, I guess. Proportion, what would it be? It doesn't matter. It would be bad. Okay, then something that's sporadic means you can't really predict when it's going to occur, so it's random. Okay, so here's some examples of 3 types of encephalitis. So the first one I have is Eastern equine encephalitis. So encephalitis means it's going to affect the brain and the brain lining, the spinal cord. Okay, so if you look here from 1975 to like 1996, it's sporadic, so it wasn't predictable. But then after 1997 and so continuing on, right, it's become more endemic. It's there. They're concerned it's really deadly, so lots of, if people get it, there's a pretty good chance they'll die. Horses, right, equine, so it can kill horses too. So it's been in the news lately because there's been horses in Pennsylvania that have had it. So there's always a little bit of it, but there's not a ton of it. But they're concerned because the numbers are going up. So it's mosquito-borne. So if it's insect-borne, mosquitoes, right, warm water. So as things warm up and the planet gets warmer, then we have more mosquitoes. So we'll have more of this type of disease. Okay, so now California encephalitis is endemic, and you can see how it occurs. And then Western equine encephalitis there are points in time where it's high. So like in 1976 or whatever, it was really high, so they considered that epidemic. Okay, now epidemiological studies. So where do I have him? I don't have Jon Snow on there. Where's he at? Do I have him? Okay, so the father of epidemiological studies is Jon Snow, and it's not the Game of Thrones Jon Snow, right? It's this other guy who lived in London in the 1800s, so that Jon Snow. So there are lots of different kinds of epidemiological outbreaks. Okay, so a common source outbreak means that maybe everybody ate the same potato salad at the party, so everybody got the same food poisoning, or everybody drank the same water and the water had something in it. Okay, now a propagated epidemic means that it can spread from person to person. Okay, so what Jon Snow did was he was the first one to really conduct a kind of an analytical study of disease. So there were lots of deaths. So there was a cholera outbreak in London. Okay, and all of these they're green dots. All of these green dots are deaths from cholera. So he might have been part of, I think he worked for the city. So he's trying to figure out what's causing this to occur. So he put 2 and 2 together, right? And if this cholera causes really bad diarrhea, Okay, so if it causes diarrhea and it's coming like through your GI tract, he's putting together the fact that you probably ingested something, you probably ate something that could, or drank something that could be causing the diarrhea. So he went around and he went door to door and he mapped all of the houses that had a death from cholera. Okay, and then all of these yellow things on here, these yellow X's, are water pumps. Okay, and there's a red one right here in the middle of the epidemic. So he looked at this and put his things together. Okay, so the fact that it could be a fecal oral, and the fact that all of these were concentrated around this pump, and he convinced the people in the city to take the thing that you pump with, the arm off the water pump, okay, to disable the water pump. So if you disabled the water pump, then what happened was the people couldn't drink this water, and this water supply was actually contaminated with cholera. Okay, and I know you see, like, there's people like that are kind of like outliers, but it turned out a lot of them either worked around here and passed by it, and there was one case where some of the people actually liked that water, so they would send their help over to get water from that pump that had the cholera. Okay, so you have to remember, like in this time, London, there wasn't a sanitation department, there wasn't good hygiene, the feces, there weren't flush toilets, there wasn't septic. Okay, so it was easy for things to get cross-contaminated. But he's the first one to come up with an idea and a map kind of like this. Okay, so now when you study epidemiology, there's different ways you can do it. So one is descriptive, where you're just describing what happens. Another is analytical, where you're trying to do cause and effect. And then the third is experimental, where you test a hypothesis. So really, Jon Snow was able to do all of that, right? Because he convinced them to take the handle off of the pump. No, where did he go? Okay, now, reservoirs of infection. Okay, so where can disease start? Okay, or where can pathogens hang out? So one thing is humans. Okay, so humans can be carriers. Okay, so a carrier is someone that can carry the pathogen, carry the organism, but they don't have any symptoms. So one famous example is Typhoid Mary. So that's supposed to be a Y. Typhoid Mary. Shoot. Oh, come on. All right. Typhoid Mary. I'm going to link a video to it. There's a nice SciShow video that talks about her. Okay, so Typhoid Mary, she was a cook, and she carried typhoid, which is a form of diarrhea. You get a rash, a fever, and typically typhoid was associated with the lower class people, and the rich people supposedly had good hygiene and didn't have typhoid. So she was a cook. So what happened was she she carried the pathogen. The Salmonella typhi was the pathogen, so she carried it. And actually, carriers carry it in their gallbladder. So she carried it in her gallbladder, and she would infect the families that she worked for. So one of the families that she worked for had enough money that they hired somebody to try to figure out where the typhoid came from. And they tracked it down to her, and her name was Mary Mallon. They ended up like putting her on an island. It was kind of crazy what they did to her, we did to her. But I'll put a link for that. Okay, another example of something that a human is a reservoir is whooping cough. So whooping cough is adults can carry it, and we don't get the symptoms, but we can transmit it to infants before they are vaccinated, before they've completed all their vaccinations, and then they get it. Okay, so animals can also be reservoirs, so we call those zoonotic diseases. So we're always watching and trying to monitor what organisms are infecting animals and whether they're going to be able to jump to humans. So there's 150 organisms that can infect both. And there's some examples listed on here. So malaria, yellow fever, Yersinia pestis, which is plague, ringworm, which is fungus, Lyme disease. Okay, then the last thing on here is non-living. So non-living reservoirs are water, food, and then fomites. So a fomite is an inanimate object that can have bacteria or fungi or something on them. So I always think of like daycare and kids' blocks or toys or whatever. So a fomite could be something that's got an organism on it. So they, you bleach and you clean. Maybe a pencil, doorknob, something like that. Okay, so portals of entry are just places in your body where things can enter. Okay, so our skin is there to protect us, and we also have mucous membranes lining our openings to protect us. But if the tissue is injured or we have openings, okay, those are all places where bacteria, fungi can get in, or viruses could get in. So they're listed on here. So eye, nose, mouth, mammary glands, urethra, vagina, anus, placenta, broken skin, ear. Okay, so anywhere like that, pathogens can get in. And then they can leave us in the form of waste products, okay, secretions, which is spelled wrong on there, secretions, blood, pus, okay, breast milk, okay, and then any place where there's an opening, things can leave, right, and that's how it can be spread. Okay, now, modes of transmission. So there's 3 big modes of transmission. So we can have contact, we can have vehicle, and we can have vector. Okay, so there's 1, 2, 3. Okay, now those are subdivided. Okay, so contact transmission, there can be direct. Okay, so that's like you get bit by a bat, or you get the saliva on you from an animal that has rabies, or you touch a syphilis or gonorrhea sore or herpes sore. Okay, so that's direct contact. The second one is indirect by fomites. So that means that maybe you you step on a rusty nail, and that has the bacteria that causes tetanus in it. Okay. And then the third one for contact is droplet. So someone was like in your face and they cough or they sneeze on you. So they actually get the droplet on you. Okay, now vehicle means that there's something carrying the pathogen. Okay, so water can be a vehicle and can carry cholera, leptospirosis, shigellosis. Okay, so water can carry organisms. Okay, air can carry organisms. Okay, so some things can be, I know the difference between this and droplets, but the droplets are, you're closer to it, where airborne is further away. Airborne means it could be like on a dust particle and it gets in the air and it can travel like around a hospital or something. Okay, and then foodborne. Food is considered a vehicle. Okay, now vector transmission means there's some sort of animal or insect that is spreading the disease. Okay, so one way that they can spread disease is mechanical. So that would be on the body of an insect. So that means that the fly lands on the garbage or like on a pile of cow manure, right? And then the fly lays on your sandwich. So it's spreading things mechanically. Okay, biological means that the insect is biting you. Okay, so that's biological in a vector. So it's biting you and that's how it's spreading. Okay, now challenges to epidemiology, disease spread. Okay, so one thing that's really challenging is that when you don't know the status of somebody, whether they're a carrier or not. So one example of that is STD, or sexually transmitted disease, or sexually transmitted infection. Sometimes they call them STIs. Okay, so if you don't know somebody's status, so it's very possible to get, from having exchange of body fluids or touching someone's body parts, that you get a disease. Okay, so zoonosis, okay, so getting something from an animal or having some new and emerging disease jump could be a problem. You have to understand disease cycles. Okay, so how's the disease transmitted? What can you do to stop it? Okay, and then herd immunity. So herd immunity we use to help and protect people that can't be vaccinated. So this picture tries to show you this. So the red person is infected. So this one person's infected. Then we have somebody who's immune, and then we have a bunch of people that are susceptible. So if this is the normal, if this is the distribution of the population, then the disease is going to spread over time. Okay, so if half the population is immune, then you might have little sporadic outbreaks of the disease. But if 90% of the population is immune, essentially you can protect the one individual that can't be vaccinated. So having the whole population be vaccinated, except for the people that medically can't be vaccinated, protects and controls the spread of disease. Okay, I'm